Recently, within the confines of China, a series of enigmatic events unfolded, bearing a distinctly criminal nature. One of the victims embroiled in this saga was widely known among the youthful demographic of the nation, commanding a substantial following within the realms of online communities. One facet of this narrative primarily pertained to circumstances leading to the demise of various individuals. Another facet, however, was more intertwined not with the crimes themselves, but with the manipulations surrounding the remains of the deceased. In essence, the concern extended beyond the mere manner of these individuals' departure from life, delving into the question of whose purpose their remains served and for what end. Overall, these events bore a resemblance, albeit faint, to ominous plotlines from some horror film, defying logical explanation for a certain period, at least to the majority of laypersons. In 2021, a truly influential user of the social media platform TikTok, under the moniker Little Kitty, boasted over 700,000 active followers, primarily recognized within the Chinese audience as a live streamer, blogger, and so-called opinion leader. She seemed to genuinely command a following, or at the very least, an audience attentive to her opinions. She was a young, affable, and attractive individual, typically sharing insights on various fashion trends and skincare products. Radiating no trace of negativity, she was widely perceived as a content and vivacious young woman for a considerable duration. However, at some juncture, everything underwent a profound transformation. Perhaps this transpired in that very same year of 2021. One day, after a prolonged hiatus, she once again graced the airwaves. However, the nature of her presence seemed to diverge significantly from the earlier, more buoyant streams she had curated. She appeared utterly fatigued, emotionally subdued, and even enervated by the vicissitudes of life. Furthermore, at the very outset of the broadcast, she hastened to impart rather disquieting tidings to her viewers, intimating that this particular stream, in all likelihood, would mark the denouement of her ephemeral existence. Following this pronouncement, she graciously thanked all her subscribers for their unwavering patronage and endeavored to engage with them in a more candid manner. The young lady confessed to grappling with severe despondency for some time now, which in her own estimation had gained ascendancy over her. Confronted with this verity, she found herself unable to perceive herself as fulfilled or content any longer, notwithstanding the anticipation of such sentiments from her followers. In addition to her preceding declaration, the young lady also disclosed her attempts to surmount her malaise during a 2-month sojourn at a specialized clinic. Alas, according to her testimony, this endeavor yielded scant tangible results. It is worth noting that following the announcement that this stream would be her last, a record number of viewers tuned in. It seemed as though over 1 million individuals were watching. The broadcast itself, as I have previously alluded to, exuded a somewhat elusive aura, appearing unfamiliar and even somewhat ominous. Initially, few of the young lady's subscribers had harbored suspicions regarding her fatal intentions. How could they have known? Admittedly, she appeared exceedingly melancholic and subdued, yet nearly all individuals, from time to time, exhibit similar countenances. This state of being hardly propels them toward irretrievable actions. Many viewers of this stream offered their support, advising her to take a brief respite. She indeed heeded their counsel, and the stream was interrupted several times. Nonetheless, she returned to the airwaves each time. To some, it even seemed as though the young lady awaited an imminent occurrence or the arrival of someone into her chamber. At least there were certain indications pointing in that direction. In some, I must reiterate, the situation appeared rather peculiar. After a span of time, a translucent bottle containing a dark liquid made a cameo on screen, bearing only a faint resemblance to a beverage known to all. Moreover, the consistency of the liquid did not appear as familiar or recognizable. Moments later, continuing her stream, the young lady commenced imbibing from the vessel in a seamless manner, gradually depleting its contents. Her imbibitions were measured and inconsequential. It seemed as though the liquid scarcely touched her lips. Furthermore, each time she brought the bottle to her mouth, she winced as though the libation possessed an incredibly repugnant taste and odor. Many became genuinely concerned about the contents of the bottle. Rather cryptically, the young lady averred that it was a mere carbonated beverage. Unfortunately, she was not forthright with her audience at that juncture. Subsequently, on the very same evening, law enforcement personnel determined that the liquid imbibed by the young lady was exceedingly toxic to the human body. Perhaps given the tenor of the broadcast and its contextual significance, many viewers began to surmise the young lady's intentions. Some even began entreating her through comments, beseeching her to reconsider and refrain from reckless actions. Yet, evidently, her resolve was unwavering, as she simply disregarded these entreaties. Ultimately, someone even summoned the authorities, but alas, law enforcement personnel did not manage to arrive in time. It is noteworthy that there were other, rather contrasting instances within which more callous and heartless individuals, fully cognizant of all transpiring, urged the young lady to consume the bottle's contents as swiftly as possible. Certainly, such comments were scarce, yet they appeared all the more conspicuous amidst the rest. In the end, not a drop of liquid remained at the bottom of the bottle, and the live broadcast halted just as abruptly as the young lady's life. Thus, she ceased to be. This occurred on August 15, 2021. The deceased's remains were cremated a few days later. However, her saga did not conclude there. In November of the same year, the tale of the young lady once again graced the headlines of most news outlets. It transpired that her ashes had been stolen by unknown perpetrators. It was alleged that the culprits, whoever they may have been, undertook this act to resell the ashes of the famed young lady to her potential fiance's relatives. Admittedly, such a statement might have sounded rather unusual and even appalling, yet the authorities of China, it seems, had encountered similar incidents not for the first time. Meanwhile, internet users among the former subscribers of the young lady still found themselves shaken by her demise. Nevertheless, they also harbored a sense of indignation upon learning certain details, known to a wide audience, that had come to light. Apparently, it was these revelations that propelled the deceased toward her fateful decision. It was revealed that for some time, the young lady had been the victim of harassment resembling a form of cyberbullying. You may be wondering why anyone would torment a young lady whose endeavors undoubtedly caused no harm to a single soul. In brief response to this question, unfortunately, individuals with such intentions did indeed exist. Thus, this tragic tale had its inception in 2019. In that year, the young lady, Kitty, entered into a romantic relationship with a young man named Zhao. The latter was an obscure blogger, primarily focusing on events related to the sports industry, particularly basketball. By his own admission, he was consumed by this sport. Essentially, prior to his encounter with Kitty, his public presence was virtually non-existent. He did not command such a large audience, and he primarily published news and videos for his own consumption. Kitty's acquaintance, however, greatly impacted Zhao. Shortly thereafter, the young lady even began assisting him in managing his account, and he experienced a significant surge in the number of subscribers. However, after several years, their relationship soured. Yes, there was nothing unusual about this. Often, young people meet for a time, only to part ways as if nothing had happened. Yet this case was particularly poignant. Apparently, Kitty's former young man harbored resentment toward her. This circumstance served as the impetus for him to launch an entire campaign aimed at besmirching her reputation. It sounds rather melodramatic, but that's precisely how it unfolded. According to Zhao, the primary reason for their breakup was Kitty's emotional instability and her sudden pregnancy. At least, that was his official version, repeatedly voiced by him on social media. He claimed that Kitty had an unstable psyche and abrupt mood swings. Allegedly, in addition to everything else, she regularly threatened to harm herself. According to him, this was her way of manipulating him, preventing him from living a normal life. Furthermore, the young man recounted how his former girlfriend inflicted various injuries upon herself and even engaged in infidelity with a wealthy man. Supposedly, she engaged in such behavior while being in a relationship with him and considered such conduct entirely normal. Thus, one day, Zhao learned that Kitty was pregnant. For a variety of reasons, he never believed that it was his child. Eventually, he attempted to break up with the young lady, having absolutely no desire to assume responsibility for another's child. Moreover, he refused to listen to Kitty, who was doing everything to salvage their relationship. In the aftermath of their breakup, Zhao felt affronted and began disseminating all that personal information which undoubtedly wrought immense harm to the young lady's mental well-being. Moreover, for unknown reasons, a rather sizable audience of internet users inexplicably believed the regularly voiced words emanating from Zhao's mouth. At one point, he even descended to the vilest insults, referring to his former beloved as nothing other than a base woman. Observers of this conflict seem to have lost their minds altogether. Day by day, they penned various comments aimed at Kitty, demanding that she divulge to them all who the true father of her child was. The entire comment section on the young lady's page literally transformed into a dump site, with a mix of various insults and threats directed at her. Furthermore, when all these people learned that Kitty had terminated her pregnancy, everything became much worse. Certainly, Zhao himself exacerbated the situation with his statements, asserting that the child could have been his. Thus, he expressed his sympathy and indignation regarding the fact that the young lady terminated the pregnancy. Allegedly, by taking such a step, she deprived him of the opportunity to become a father. Apparently, at that moment, he was trying to appear as someone he had never been. The young man even implored users to cease writing offensive comments about his former girlfriend, but they were already unstoppable. Moreover, it is no secret to anyone that people can be extremely cruel, especially on the internet, where, essentially, no one bears any responsibility for any form of aggression. As time passed, the situation seemed to have changed. Many users lost interest in these events. Moreover, both Kitty and Zhao embarked on new relationships. Overall, the young lady rarely spoke out against her former young man. It seems she simply did not want to cause him pain, despite Zhao's efforts to tarnish her reputation. The only issue that troubled Kitty was related to her belief that Zhao did not love her, but rather used her for ulterior motives, desiring access to her vast audience. In essence, he did indeed achieve a colossal growth in the number of his subscribers, so the young lady had every reason to believe that he had truly engaged in a relationship with her for this purpose. Moreover, there was something curious about it. During this time, Zhao's reputation was also tarnished, if one may say so. It turned out that he offered his subscribers to engage in a non-committal intimate relationship with him. Apparently, the young man wanted to capitalize on his acquired popularity, but to his chagrin, some of the young women still chose to decline such an offer and posted messages about his advances online. In turn, Kitty attempted several times to convey that Zhao generally treated his audience inappropriately, but for a variety of reasons, she did not do so, deeming such intervention beneath her attention. The fact is, she was not the kind of person to engage in any kind of expose. It simply did not interest her. She was above all of that, even in cases where someone tried to damage her reputation. She only sought to clarify some particularly important points after breaking up with Zhao. First and foremost, she insisted that she would never under any circumstances simulate any sort of mental disorder. In her opinion, it was something abhorrent and did not align with her character. Furthermore, she documentarily confirmed her previously diagnosed depression. Perhaps it was not advisable to share one's diagnosis on various social media platforms, especially when doing so in an attempt to prove something to someone. However, Kitty merely wanted to demonstrate to everyone that she did not exploit her melancholy as a tool to attract new followers. Furthermore, she clarified other circumstances, indicating that she never threatened Zhao with self-harm, thus manipulating him. On the contrary, according to her, he attempted to exert complete control over her life, insisting on opening a joint bank account. She, of course, declined, fully aware of the possible consequences of such a step. Then the young man decided to part ways with her, accusing her of various misdeeds. The young lady was indeed pregnant, but according to her statement, this child was indeed Zhao's. Kitty herself attempted to persuade him to take a paternity test, but he was uninterested. He actively avoided taking the test, attributing his reluctance either to lack of trust in her or to a shortage of time. Apparently, Zhao was well aware that the child was indeed his, but he was unwilling to assume any form of responsibility for it. Perhaps that's why he began to level various accusations against Kitty, speaking of her dissolute lifestyle and frequent encounters with other male companions. It must be noted that his tactic proved effective. As for Kitty's new beau, unfortunately for her, he turned out to be less than honorable and apparently began dating her for various economic purposes, much like Zhao. Somehow, he even coerced her into purchasing a house for him, which he registered under his name. Of course, he promised her that their love would be eternal, so she could rest assured of his intentions. However, things turned out differently. Rumor had it that this individual might also have been involved in the events leading to the young lady consuming the contents of the bottle. After what happened to Kitty, he simply vanished. It is difficult to say why law enforcement authorities showed no interest in his person. Perhaps they had no evidence against him, but that is no longer so important. Some people believe that the last farewell conducted by Kitty was a form of cry for help, albeit directed at a specific individual. In addition to everything mentioned earlier, I would like to highlight another intriguing fact. On the account of one user, who was much more insistent than others in persuading the young lady to drink the contents of the bottle, there was a photograph with a certain basketball player. Recall that it was Zhao who was fond of basketball. I am not claiming that this individual was unequivocally him. Moreover, I cannot prove it to you, but who knows? Overall, many internet users noticed this detail, sensing a special connection to Kitty's former young man. Given this circumstance, the family of the deceased young lady even attempted to hold the owner of this account accountable, but the authorities were unable to determine the identity of the person to whom it belonged. Zhao himself was well aware that suspicion could fall on him. For this reason, he hastened to announce that he was willing to take partial responsibility for what happened to his former girlfriend, at least if the situation required it. Furthermore, he stated that Kitty's family members could always come and talk to him directly, although I suppose they simply had no such intention. And the young man understood this perfectly well. But let's return to another incident in which several unknown individuals stole the ashes of the deceased young lady. Strictly speaking, it would be more accurate to say that they replaced them, but this somehow does not negate the fact of the theft itself. Later, it was established that at least 3 individuals were involved in replacing what remained of Kitty. They were all subsequently apprehended and confessed to their deeds, stating that they had intended to sell her ashes for a so-called ceremony of ghostly marriages. By admitting this, they could earn around $10,000. Upon learning of this, I immediately had several questions. For example, who would want to marry a dead woman with what remained of her body? And why would anyone buy and sell the bodies of deceased individuals, especially for such large sums of money? Of course, we are all aware that the female body is often commodified, not to mention that there are places on this planet where this still occurs. Moreover, in this world, there are so many bad people who, for one reason or another, engage in the shadowy business and seek to profit from the exploitation of women. Furthermore, we have all heard stories of human trafficking, especially in so-called third world countries. All of this is undoubtedly and remains a horrific crime against human life, but it still occurs to this day, and it is certainly not news. However, I doubt that many of you have heard of cases where the body of a deceased woman was valued much higher than that of a living one. It is precisely for this reason that this case is so intriguing, mysterious, and unlike any other. Let's delve into it further. Between Kitty's affair and another incident that occurred in a small rural town in central China, there is only a slight connection, but I believe it is important to discuss it for a better understanding of the overall picture. On what seemed like an ordinary evening, a light drizzle was falling outside. The Jiang family invited their distant relatives and friends for a small family celebration. They adorned their home and courtyard somewhat extravagantly for the occasion. Red banners with characteristic cuts and the word happiness adorned the walls. It seemed to be something akin to a typical family gathering, or perhaps even a wedding. At least, no major national holidays were being celebrated that day. On one of the walls hung a rather large portrait of a young man. Everything appeared extremely unusual, yet the attending guests were not particularly surprised. As I mentioned earlier, while remotely reminiscent, this event resembled a wedding ceremony. However, none of the invited guests smiled, danced, or even interacted with each other. In other words, the atmosphere more closely resembled a wake with a cocktail of marriage intertwined. In part, That's exactly what it was. It turned out that the young man, whose large portrait had been hanging on one wall of the house for almost a month, had tragically perished in a horrific car accident. But then, why would he need to marry anyone? After some time, the head of the family, apparently the deceased young man's father, announced that it was time for the groom and bride to retire to the bridal chamber and finally to unite with each other. He then named several zodiac signs and invited several people who corresponded to the named signs to follow him. That's exactly what they did. Meanwhile, bringing along several shovels, which stood at the exit of the house, a handful of people approached the spot where makeshift graves awaited them. As you can imagine, the latter did not appear before the guests in the manner that is customary at our familiar wedding ceremonies. On the contrary, both the young man and his future spouse had been lying in coffins for some time. At one point, the groom's uncle began to utter pre-prepared words. "My dear nephew, we have finally found you a wife. Now you will not feel lonely, as she will take care of you properly." I reiterate that the young man's future wife was also deceased. The family of the deceased young man purchased her body, paying around $4,000 for it. Literally yesterday, they brought her body to the town. She was dressed in an elegant red gown, and how should I put it, looked much fresher than the deceased young man. Although this is not surprising, considering the fact that he had passed away some time before her. Meanwhile, a rather large pit had already been dug for the young couple, and their coffins were then lowered into its depths. Due to the light rain that day, the process of burying the bodies was soon halted, albeit temporarily. In the realm of love, the guests hastened to seek shelter in anticipation of changing weather conditions. These changes did not delay, as just a few hours later, the events of that day continued to unfold. The subsequent part of the story perhaps may sound like yet another urban legend to many. I understand that perfectly, but that's no reason to interrupt the narrative. Furthermore, according to witnesses of that ceremony, all of this did indeed happen openly. Once the rain ceased to bother the guests, they began to return to the place where the coffin with the newlyweds still lay. Upon approaching closer, one of the guests heard a noise resembling the scraping of an animal. To the surprise of those present, the source of the noise was found directly inside the coffin. Moments later, people witnessed the lid of the coffin slowly opening. Naturally, some of the guests recoiled in horror, believing that it was moved by none other than an evil spirit. Immediately thereafter, before the bewildered guests' eyes, emerged the young bride, her wet and heavy hair covering her face, rendering her almost blind. Waving her hands from side to side, the girl attempted to comprehend what had happened to her and where she was. One of the guests, managing his sincere astonishment, attempted to communicate with the girl, asking her whether she was a ghost or indeed human. In response, the girl emitted several sounds that faintly resembled human speech. This is not surprising, as just a few hours earlier, the bride herself had been unaware that she was alive. After some time, people finally realized what had actually occurred. Consequently, they decided to inform the police. It turned out that someone had mistakenly sold them a living person instead of a dead one. This circumstance understandably greatly upset the father of the deceased young man. Several hours later, several police cars, accompanied by an ambulance, arrived in the small rural town. Subsequently, the girl who had risen from the dead was transported to the nearest hospital. The next day, it was revealed that the girl, who had nearly been buried alive, suffered from severe mental disorders. One could even say she was not entirely self-sufficient. She had been abducted, and the abductor was an elderly man who had offered to give her a ride home. Upon getting into his car, the victim discovered that there were several other people besides him inside. One of them offered her a bottle of water, and she, fully trusting the strangers, took it and took a small sip. Within moments, she fell asleep. Apparently, she was then drugged and prepared for subsequent sale as someone's future wife. Thus, the shadowy business of selling phantom brides was in operation, and this time the wrongdoers simply miscalculated the dosage of the drug, miraculously allowing the girl to survive. For a while, she remained unconscious and apparently showed absolutely no signs of life. Yet either the wrongdoers simply did not notice them or were careless. When the truth came to light, the father of the deceased young man, who had previously purchased the girl's body for a subsequent phantom wedding ceremony, pledged to help find her relatives. He was still shaken by the situation and felt partly guilty. In the end, he indeed took various measures to locate someone who might know the victim of the abduction. He took a series of detailed photographs of the girl and posted them on social networks. Amazingly, these actions yielded almost instant results, and her family was found. Meanwhile, law enforcement officials launched a criminal investigation and began to investigate the incident, suspecting that they had encountered an organized criminal group engaged in human trafficking. According to the information available to investigators, the main suspect was around 60 years old. He had already retired and in recent years had been earning a living by selling the bodies of women. Most of the time, he and his associates spent traveling around, seeking their new victims, who often turned out to be vulnerable girls. Primarily, the man used his advanced age and benevolence, offering various forms of assistance to his victims. The vast majority of the girls abducted by the criminals had previously faced various life difficulties. Some of them were even disabled or homeless. In other words, the victims themselves experienced certain life challenges, making them trusting and vulnerable. Moreover, the kidnappers did not consider such girls as human beings. They viewed them as commodities, items that allowed them to earn money, and thus they simply did not have any feelings towards them. Initially, the criminals had a different tactic. They did not even plan to kill anyone. They believed they would buy the bodies of deceased girls from their families. To do this, the perpetrators attempted to find less affluent segments of society where certain revelry occurred. Afterward, they would purchase these so-called goods and then search for affluent buyers. The latter, by the way, were much easier to find. By selling the body of the deceased, one could easily earn a considerable sum of money without having any legal issues. By the way, the leader of this criminal group had already served a prison sentence. In the past, he had also engaged in the abduction of women. However, unlike this case, the abducted women were placed in a boudoir that the criminal organized on his own property. I believe you understand what kind of person he was. He was caught and brought to trial before, but apparently, having served his sentence, he did not lose his desire to break the law. Nevertheless, he did learn a few lessons. One of them, according to his own admission, sounded like this: "Dead girls don't talk, so they don't cause problems and can't turn to authorities for help." As I mentioned earlier, in some parts of the world, the bodies of deceased women are worth more than those of the living. In the case of deceased bodies, there are even specific rankings and evaluations. You might think that for so-called phantom weddings, brides are chosen solely based on their external appearance. Well, partly that's true, but the most important factor influencing the final price of the body is its condition. The most valuable bodies are those whose owners, for example, spend their last day in a hospital bed. Such goods were called fresh. Typically, in transactions involving bodies of this kind, either family members or other close relatives are actively involved. According to initial assessments, prices can vary from demand and supply and reach $12,000. The second category of bodies is called wet, referring to people who departed from this world from a few weeks to a few months ago. On average, their price fluctuates around $7,000. And finally, the last category includes bodies of people who died more than 6 months ago. In the latter case, the price range is the largest. For this reason, it is difficult to determine the average cost of such bodies. Of course, there were other evaluation criteria as well. For example, highly educated young girls and women from affluent families were considered particularly valuable commodities, and they were valued much higher than others. Let us return to the leader of one of the criminal organizations who was engaged in the sale of bodies and focus on how he sought clients for subsequent transactions. It turned out to be rather simple. He published advertisements in various newspapers across the country, stating that his close unmarried relative had supposedly passed away. Furthermore, he claimed that the deceased had earnestly desired to find herself a groom, but had not succeeded in doing so. Additionally, he provided a brief description of the deceased, usually presenting her in the best light. And you know, such advertisements truly worked. For each girl or woman he sold in this manner, there was a family with a deceased son and a significant amount of money. Eventually, the groom's family would buy the body of the supposed bride, conduct a wedding ceremony, and keep the newlyweds together so they could live another life. But in the afterworld, the business was so lucrative that those involved could earn tens of thousands of dollars per month, at least if they were indeed professionals in this field. The most interesting part is that after the transaction was completed, practically no one could determine whether the victims had passed away naturally or not. Moreover, the demand for such brides far exceeded the number of families willing to sell their deceased relatives. Apparently, this reality prompted the criminals to create such phantom brides themselves, committing crimes against human life. Although they often simply abducted the bodies of the deceased, digging them up from graves, it is worth noting that the leader of the criminal cell I told you about was soon apprehended. According to available information, he and his accomplices received quite severe punishments and are unlikely to be released. Moreover, besides them, there still remains a fairly large number of people who earn a living in this manner. For instance, in 2006, in the province of Shaanxi, there was another similar incident relatively recently. A man named Yuan's native brother passed away. It turned out that he was poisoned by his own wife. She, of course, received punishment, but she was not the main culprit. In the end, the deceased brother did not want his brother to remain alone in the afterlife. Therefore, he gathered a certain sum of money and contacted a certain ghostly matchmaker. Surprisingly, this was the name people of this profession called themselves. The matchmaker, in turn, thoroughly questioned the man about the zodiac sign and other information about the deceased and set out to find him a suitable bride. For understandable reasons, you, believing in such traditions, cannot know for sure whether the future spouses will agree or not. After all, they had never met each other in life and had no opportunity to get to know each other better. In this regard, when choosing a partner, people usually relied on the zodiac sign. So after some time, the matchmaker contacted Yuan and informed him that she had found the parents of the girl who was allegedly terminally ill. According to them, she was expected to pass away any day now. Yuan accepted this information enthusiastically, considering this girl to be a perfect candidate for his brother's bride. After a few days, the man received a coffin with the body of the future bride and began to prepare for the ceremony. Surprisingly, he even contacted the police and asked several officers to attend the event. Overall, phantom marriages had been practically banned nationwide for quite some time. But in rural areas, authorities could turn a blind eye to such actions. Moreover, Yuan himself informed them of everything, deciding to warn them that he had not killed anyone but had simply bought the body of the deceased girl from her parents. Eventually, the ceremony proceeded under the careful watch of law enforcement, and the newlyweds were buried together, as tradition demanded. It seemed that everyone was satisfied with this process. Indeed, unlike some of her colleagues, the matchmaker did not cross the line of the law. However, at the end of the same year, authorities still arrested this woman, accusing her of abducting and killing several girls. Remarkably, among them was this bride. The young lady's name was Mai. Her father approached the law enforcement authorities with a report of his daughter's disappearance. According to him, he had not heard any information about her for some time. As a result, the police conducted a swift investigation and fairly quickly tracked down the culprit. Mai was a young lady with serious mental health issues. Her consciousness ceased its development when she was no more than 6 years old. Consequently, she was unable to become an independent individual. Her parents were extremely impoverished and simply did not know what to do with their daughter. Furthermore, they had been in a state of melancholy for quite some time, realizing that their child would likely not have a normal future, especially if something were to happen to them. When May turned 20, her relatives decided that they could try to marry her off to a stranger. It's hard to say why they made this decision. Perhaps due to their advanced age or economic status, they could no longer care for their daughter. Overall, it's difficult for me to imagine myself in their shoes and understand precisely what prompted their decision. They probably believed that somehow they could find someone who would provide their helpless girl with the attention and care she needed. At least as far as I know, they believed that someone would take them and their daughter as spouses. In their opinion, she would be able to bear children for this person, regardless of her condition. Additionally, they asserted that Mai would never become a proper wife since she would require constant care. Remarkably, a certain man did show interest in May's parents' offer. His only requirement was that she could bear him children. Everything else did not concern him in the least. Consequently, he paid May's relatives a few $100s and brought her to his home. However, after a few weeks, the man contacted May's relatives again and demanded a refund and that they take the girl back. He essentially attempted to return merchandise that did not suit him for one reason or another, although the reasons were certainly known for certain. The man claimed that the girl was so helpless that he had to take care of her practically around the clock. Furthermore, he was outraged by another circumstance that came to light quite accidentally. It turned out that May would never be able to have children, and yet this ability was what initially interested him. For some unknown reason, May's parents refused to take her back home. Perhaps they believed that the man would change his mind and accept the circumstances. However, he did not want to reconcile with the problems that had so profoundly affected his way of life. Consequently, he decided to resell May to a matchmaker we are already familiar with. It is worth noting that not every matchmaker of this kind was someone who took lives, but unfortunately, May fell into the hands of just such a woman. The latter agreed quite quickly to buy the girl and informed the seller that she was willing to pay several $1,000s for her. Upon hearing this offer, the man was literally stunned. He had not expected to make any money from May, let alone several $1,000s. Unable to contain his curiosity, he attempted to inquire from the matchmaker what exactly she planned to do with the girl. For some reason, she was quite candid in her conversation with him. She even told him about her intention to kill May and then sell her body as a phantom bride. The prospective groom was so taken with this idea that he even agreed to participate in its execution. After some time, they found a buyer. Buyers were always available. They just needed to deal with the girl because alive, she was simply a burden and worthless. So they mixed a white powder, used for metal cleaning, onto the surface of a piece of white bread and forcefully fed it to May. The makeshift poison acted slowly, and the girl passed away over the course of several hours, experiencing incredible agony. Later, they brought her to the buyer, who turned out to be Yuan. He, of course, had no idea that his brother's future bride had been killed, not passed away naturally, as he had been told earlier. Yuan simply wanted the best for his brother and ended up practically becoming an accomplice to the crime. May's parents, of course, blamed themselves for everything that had happened to her. They deeply regretted attempting to forcibly marry her off to a stranger. So what exactly is a phantom marriage? And why do such ceremonies still enjoy particular popularity in some corners of our planet? In China, to this day, there exists an ancient tradition called menhun. This tradition is a blend of various values based on traditional Chinese culture. According to traditional Chinese values, a person can only find happiness by being married. Conversely, remaining in unofficial relationships can become a curse not only for the individual, but also for all members of their family. Do I need to remind you that not too long ago in China, it was considered shameful to be the parent of an unmarried, and moreover, completely unwed girl? Additionally, it was believed that being happy in the afterlife without a partner was also impossible, just as it was in ordinary life. It is assumed that spouses journey to the afterlife together, and while there, assist each other in every possible way. I understand perfectly well that such information may sound somewhat peculiar, but in this case, attention must be drawn to the fact that this phenomenon is part of a foreign culture. So, for example, according to Chinese beliefs about the afterlife, it is largely similar to the ordinary life. For this reason, there is an opinion that a couple, being a family, can handle all the difficulties and adversities much better than a single person. Essentially, it was precisely this approach that influenced the emergence of such a tradition as menhun. Of course, there were other reasons for entering into a phantom marriage. According to another Chinese tradition, the youngest son in a family was forbidden to marry before his older brothers did. But what if one of the older brothers passed away? In such a case, a phantom marriage came to the rescue once again. A bride was found for the deceased, thereby resolving the problem that had arisen. Although, as time showed, this tradition had its distinctly negative aspects, one of which was evidently criminal. Overall, there are several types of such unions. The first of them is quite common and rather unprofitable. In this variant, a phantom marriage is contracted between a living person and a deceased one. For instance, if the life of a member of a family is interrupted due to certain circumstances, their relatives do not want them to depart to the afterlife alone. In this case, they find a partner among the living who, for some reason, expresses their desire to participate in the bridal ceremony. Essentially, this action holds no legal force. The living person does it for a small profit or simply because they want to make the deceased family members happy. In the second type, as you may have already guessed, the destinies of the deceased are bound together, or rather, their relatives do it for them. It remains remarkable that the people who are supposed to live together in the afterlife usually never met before, but for some reason, their relatives are confident that they will get along with each other. There is actually a whole protocol for such a ceremony. The groom's family goes to the memorial stone, which is nothing more than a gravestone at the bride's gravesite. All this action must look grand and symbolic, although in most cases, it depends on the family's financial well-being. At the same time, the bride's close relatives must behave as if their child is leaving the parental home forever. They bid her farewell. Then the bride's body is brought to the groom's body, and the person conducting the ceremony ties the photographs of the newlyweds together using a special red thread. After this action, the bodies are buried in a joint grave, and they bid farewell to the newlyweds forever. Next, the guests go to the table and begin the ceremonial feast. On the table, there are usually dishes of noodles, dumplings, and a large abundance of alcohol. For such weddings, the second, third, sixth, or eighth day of the month is often used. It is important to note that this method of conducting the ceremony is just one of many. Depending on the region or province, phantom marriages may be conducted differently. Overall, nowadays, a ceremony that combines two deceased people in marriage is quite a rare phenomenon and is encountered only among very superstitious people. Figuratively speaking, in such large cities as Beijing or Shanghai, phantom marriages have long been unheard of. However, it should be clarified that the regions in China differ greatly in terms of economic development and culture. The difference between a major city and a small province can be simply staggering. According to available data today, the province of Shaanxi, located in northern China, is the leader in the number of contracted phantom marriages. At the same time, this phenomenon still persists in several other regions. Back in the late 1940s, the authorities began to combat the Menhun tradition, but apparently they were unable to completely eradicate it. Moreover, at the end of the 20th century, the country's social policy gave even greater popularity to such unions, although the authorities themselves did not expect everything to turn out this way. In the 1980s, a legislative rule was introduced in China, which stated that one family could have only one child. Thus, local authorities attempted to address the existing issue of overpopulation. Such a rule remained in effect until 2016. To everyone's surprise, the combination of this law and the traditional cultural code simply played a cruel joke on Chinese society. During this period, there was a significant gender imbalance, with boys becoming more desired children than girls. This was primarily due to the perception in many societies that men are providers and continuators of lineage. Yes, this viewpoint may seem morally outdated, yet it still influenced decision-making processes, conception, and childbirth. As a result, many families simply opted for pregnancy termination upon learning that they would have a girl in the future. Currently, there is a noticeable gender imbalance in favor of males in China. Put simply, there became an excess of male representatives, while the number of females sharply declined. Consequently, for matured young individuals, it becomes difficult to find a partner, affecting not only conventional marriages, but phantom ones as well. Hence, it is not surprising that women and even female bodies, albeit absurd as it may sound, are in high demand. Due to this, parents of deceased young, or in some cases, single men, are willing to pay substantial sums for the body of a potential bride. Moreover, some parents of daughters who died for various reasons begin to treat their bodies as valuable assets that can be lucratively sold. It is incredible how one law aimed at population control could inadvertently lead to, seemingly unrelated, processes and give rise to a previously non-existent criminal underworld. From an economic standpoint, the business of such unions could boldly assert that the supply of deceased brides was much lower than the demand for them. In some provinces, the demand was simply staggering, which meant that one could earn substantial profits from this, especially considering that the environment itself was not so competitive. And it is not surprising, as hardly a large number of people would express their desire to engage in such activities. According to various sources, at its peak, the industry of phantom marriages reached unprecedented proportions, likely surpassing all possible estimates. Based on a report from one of the universities in Shanghai, which studied phantom marriages for over 15 years, the peak of the industry occurred in 2010. At that time, the price for the body of a deceased bride could reach $40,000 to $50,000, and this price did not even include other expenses associated with organizing the marriage ceremony itself. Continuing with today's topic, it is worth touching on another theme and discussing another Chinese tradition indirectly related to phantom marriages. Perhaps some of you have heard that in China and other Asian countries, it is customary to give each other red envelopes. Typically, these envelopes contain money and are given as gifts, especially to young children. Overall, receiving a red envelope is traditionally considered something good and is often associated with celebrating the new year. There are certain rules for accepting such an envelope. As the recipient, you should take it with both hands and behave as if there is nothing inside the envelope. Even in China, you understand that there is money inside, but despite this, you do not attempt to peek inside immediately after receiving it. In other words, opening this envelope in the presence of the giver would be perceived as disrespect toward them. However, red envelopes are associated with another tradition that imposes certain obligations on the person who has taken it in their hands. True, in this situation, they are not so much given as usually found on the street. Imagine walking along a busy street in a Chinese town or city, and you come across a red envelope on your path. It literally lies at your feet, and you realize that there is something inside. Perhaps at that moment, some of you would prefer to just walk past, but surely there are those who would be curious to see what's inside. Maybe there are money or other valuable items. However, upon opening this envelope, you may encounter something that not only disappoints you, but also disgusts you, as it may contain scraps of paper with writing and a few strands of hair and information about the zodiac sign of a person. Perhaps at that moment, you will wonder why someone left all this inside the envelope. The answer may not be long in coming. Most likely, at that very moment while you are still standing there, holding the envelope in your hands, a stranger may appear from the corner, who will immediately declare to you that fate itself has chosen you as a spouse for their deceased child. It may seem like an absurd prank at first. However, later on, you will probably learn that this child is no longer alive by that time. I understand that in this situation, you would simply politely decline this dubious offer. In that case, you should be prepared to be cursed for the rest of your life. In general, all the cases you have learned about today occurred within the territory of China. However, such marriages are contracted practically all over the world. Of course, in most cases in these countries, they do not have such a mysterious name and are carried out rather unceremoniously. Moreover, it is worth noting that spouses, as a rule, were acquainted with each other long before entering into the union. For example, in France, even to this day, women and men, in the event of the death of their partner, are granted permission to conduct a marriage ceremony directly by the president of the country.